In July 2025, Donald Trump, back in the White House, reignited trade tensions with a series of tariff threats. This was a blunt strategy aimed at America's closest trading partners, reviving his protectionist playbook. Trump viewed trade deficits as a national crisis, invoking the 1977 International Emergency Economic Powers Act. His threats followed an underwhelming 90 deals in 90 days initiative, aiming to force concessions on various issues. However, the global landscape had shifted and world leaders were better prepared for his tactics. As the August deadline loomed, the question was how targeted nations would react: capitulate, retaliate, or find a third way. The stage was set for a dramatic confrontation with global consequences. Trump's tariff threats targeted specific countries, mixing trade complaints with political grievances. Mexico faced a 30% tariff over drug flow concerns, linking tariffs to the opioid crisis. Canada, a close ally, was threatened with a 35% tariff, questioning the stability of the USMCA. Brazil faced a 50% tariff, linked to Bolsonaro's trial, turning trade policy into political patronage. The European Union was also threatened, continuing disputes over various products. Each threat contributed to a narrative. The US would use economic power to enforce its will. The world was told that predictable partnerships were over. The era of American economic pressure had begun. The global reaction to Trump's threats was not one of panic or chaos, but rather a display of calm, strategic thinking. Around the world, leaders gathered to assess the situation, weighing their options with measured resolve. Instead of succumbing to pressure, they chose to act with a blend of defiance and diplomacy, signaling a shift in international relations. Mexico's President Sheinbaum expressed confidence in her country's ability to negotiate better conditions, emphasizing dialogue over direct confrontation. Sheinbaum's administration worked behind the scenes, building alliances and preparing for tough negotiations, determined to protect Mexico's interests without escalating tensions. In Brazil, President Lula da Silva took a different approach. He vowed to impose retaliatory tariffs if necessary, using strong rhetoric to unify a previously divided nation. Lula's stance sent a clear message. Brazil would not tolerate US interference and was ready to defend its sovereignty on the world stage. Meanwhile, Canada, under Prime Minister Mark Carney, openly criticized Trump's moves, calling them threats to global stability and the international economic order. Carney's government quickly coordinated with allies, seeking a united front against protectionist policies. Carney's pragmatic response included dropping retaliatory tariffs to match US exemptions, but he also made it clear that Canada would not be bullied. His administration balanced firmness with flexibility, aiming to protect Canadian jobs and industries while keeping diplomatic channels open. This approach positioned Canada as a reasonable and principled actor, defending its interests while still abiding by international agreements. Carney's leadership was seen as a model for other nations facing similar challenges. The collective response from these countries demonstrated that the world was no longer willing to be passive in the face of American pressure. Instead, leaders found strength in unity and cooperation. For many, the lesson was clear. Standing up to powerful nations could be politically beneficial at home, rallying public support and strengthening national identity. The threats from Washington fostered a new sense of shared purpose among targeted nations, encouraging collaboration and mutual support in the face of adversity. Together, they pushed back against coercive diplomacy, challenging old assumptions and reshaping global power dynamics for a new era. The world was not just reacting to tariffs. It was actively redefining its stance against destabilizing tactics, determined to create a more balanced and resilient international system. In the face of uncertainty, a new era of international resilience and cooperation was emerging, one where nations stood together, ready to defend their interests and shape the future on their own terms. When President Trump announced sweeping tariff threats, the ripple effects quickly spread far beyond the initial market reactions. What began as a bold negotiating tactic soon triggered a wave of uncertainty, sending shockwaves through both domestic and international economies. Investors, analysts, and business leaders scrambled to assess the potential fallout, while global markets braced for volatility. For everyday Americans, the most immediate impact was felt at the checkout counter. Rising prices became a growing concern for consumers as tariffs on imported goods led to noticeable hikes in the cost of groceries, household items, and other essentials. Families found themselves stretching their budgets further, sometimes making tough choices about what to buy. The agricultural sector, a cornerstone of Trump's political base, faced mounting risks from potential Mexican retaliation. Farmers, already grappling with unpredictable weather and fluctuating commodity prices, now worried about losing access to crucial export markets. Many feared that retaliatory tariffs would make their crops less competitive abroad, threatening their livelihoods. The U.S. economy, operating at full employment, couldn't easily replace the flow of imports from Mexico. This led to higher costs for manufacturers and retailers who struggled to find alternative suppliers. In some cases, shelves sat empty, or businesses faced delays, further driving up prices for consumers. Uncertainty surrounding the future of the USMCA trade agreement added another layer of complexity. The lack of clarity damaged confidence in cross-border commerce, making it harder for companies to plan investments or sign long-term contracts. Businesses thrive on predictability, and sudden policy shifts eroded the ability to make sound, long-term plans. Executives and entrepreneurs found themselves in a constant state of flux, unsure how to adapt to the changing landscape. Meanwhile, the administration's legal authority to impose tariffs was challenged in courts and debated in Congress, highlighting deep divisions over trade policy and the limits of executive power. The economic impact was not just about numbers on a spreadsheet, it was about eroding the stable trade relationships that businesses and workers had relied on for decades. Trust between trading partners began to fray, making future cooperation more difficult. As living costs rose and American industries faced new risks, many families and small businesses struggled to keep up. These were the unintended consequences, real people feeling the effects of policy decisions made far from their daily lives. In the end, the strategy threatened to tip the balance, with the potential costs to American households and businesses outweighing any hoped-for gains. Canada's Prime Minister, Mark Carney, mounted an effective response to Trump's threats. Carney positioned Canada as a champion of a stable, rules-based order, contrasting Trump's chaos. He condemned tariffs, highlighting their harm to both Canadian and American workers. Carney's pragmatic approach aligned retaliatory measures with USMCA exemptions. This move exposed potential U.S. violations of its own agreements. Trump's threats, intended to intimidate, instead unified Canada against perceived bullying. Carney's leadership consolidated support, projecting strong, competent leadership. He defended Canadian sovereignty and respectful international partnership. Carney's strategy showed that calm, principled stances could counter superpower aggression. Canada turned a defensive position into surprising strength and influence. Trump's tariff strategy was a masterclass in domestic political messaging. The threats were more about image cultivation than achieving trade concessions. Analysts saw them as electoral propaganda to energize his base. By challenging allies and adversaries, Trump performed as the ultimate fighter. The strategy was theatrical, generating headlines and shifting focus from domestic issues. The approach created a crisis only he could solve, positioning him as the nation's protector. However, this focus on domestic perception came at an international cost. The bluff worked at home but failed spectacularly abroad, alienating America's closest neighbors. In 2025, Donald Trump's renewed threats of sweeping tariffs were meant to project strength and force adversaries to the negotiating table. But these bold declarations soon revealed the limits of coercive diplomacy in a world more interconnected than ever before. Rather than isolating his targets, Trump's aggressive stance had an unintended effect. It brought rival leaders together, strengthening their alliances and boosting their political capital at home and abroad. The tariffs failed to secure America's borders or influence high-profile legal cases like Bolsonaro's trial. Instead, they triggered widespread economic disruption, delays at ports, shortages on store shelves, and a chilling effect on cross-border trade. For American families and businesses, the consequences were immediate and painful. Prices soared, supply chains faltered, and uncertainty rippled through the economy, self-inflicted wounds that hurt the very people the policy was supposed to protect. The administration's strategy overlooked a crucial reality. Tariffs are a blunt tool in a complex, globalized marketplace. They rarely achieve precise goals and often backfire, harming domestic industries and workers. As the world watched, foreign governments adapted quickly, learning to call Trump's bluff. The U.S. was left to manage the economic fallout, while its rivals found new ways to sidestep American pressure. America's international standing suffered. Trust in U.S. leadership eroded, and the predictability that once defined American diplomacy was replaced by doubt and hesitation among allies. In response, allies diversified their partnerships. forging new agreements and quietly reconfiguring global alliances to reduce their dependence on the US. Ultimately, real strength in international relations comes not from threats or ultimatums, but from building consensus, fostering cooperation, and earning trust through steady engagement. The tariff gambit was a high-stakes bet that failed to pay off, serving as a stark reminder that in today's world, effective diplomacy is more valuable than ever.